Hello and welcome. You watching India First. I'm Gaurav Sawant. Remember that iconic image of that lone man standing in front of the Chinese army tanks at the Tiananmen Square in 1989. That video of that lone unarmed man taking on the might of the Chinese army and forcing the tanks to change the direction went viral. 33 years later, another picture has gone viral in Beijing. A lone man wearing an orange jacket and a yellow hard hat, burning tires, chanting slogans on a loud hailer. He also had two posters and banners calling for the removal of dictator Xi Jinping in Beijing. The timing of these images ahead of the Chinese Communist Party Congress giving Xi Jinping an unprecedented third term, perhaps making him president for life, is extremely curious. We bring you this report. Images that have stunned the world. Rare protest in Beijing ahead of Chinese Communist Party Congress for the re-election of President Xi Jinping for an unprecedented third term that could well make him president of China for life. The protest banner roars. We want food, not PCR test. We want freedom, not lockdown. We want reforms, not cultural revolution. We want respect, not lies. We want to vote, not a leader. We want to be citizens, not slaves. The lone protester wearing an orange jacket and a yellow hard hat was photographed on the Sitong Bridge in Beijing. He's reported to have set some tires on fire and chanted slogans on a loud hailer.
Xi Jinping is certainly a polarizing individual. People who dislike his policies suggest that the problems with the policies are a result of the leadership model, that it's because he has demonstrated these strongman tendencies that policy effectiveness has decreased.
The lone protester is being hailed as a hero in China. His calling for civil disobedience and smashing of COVID testing centers and the prevention of Xi Jinping from becoming a dictator were being discussed extensively in China before Chinese authorities launched a massive exercise to scrub the internet clean. All searches with the words Bridge, Sitong, Beijing, protest are reported to have been scrubbed clean. But online, the lone protester is being compared to the lone protester at the Tiananmen Square in 1989, whose heroic actions stalled the advance of Chinese army tanks in Beijing.
And he's established himself as the sole penultimate leader of China. He's not beholden to the leaders around him. He is the core. He's not part of it. And as a result, we've seen some policy excesses. We've seen some challenges in China's economy. We've seen the COVID, including censorship, policing, to further control and enhance the party's control over the everyday lives of Chinese citizens.
Chinese President Xi Jinping's zero COVID policy has led to widespread protests across China, showing hundreds protesting a lockdown and shortages of food, medicines and other essential supplies. Images of tanks outside banks with people unable to withdraw money, to a virtual collapse of the real estate sector and people refusing to pay installment for homes have also gone viral. But analysts argue there is almost no major threat to the Chinese president, as the Communist Party is set to give him an unprecedented third term. This will make Xi Jinping the most powerful man in China after Chairman Mao Zedong. President Xi has also consolidated his control over not just the army but also the paramilitary forces and is believed to have jailed potential opponents in what the Chinese government claims is an anti-corruption purge. There is little real threat to Xi Jinping as he prepares to remain President of China for life. Bureau Report, India Today. So you saw the poster and the banner saying we want food, not COVID PCR test. We want freedom, not lockdown. We want respect, not lies. We want to be citizens, not slaves. Joining me on India First is Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, former Flag Officer Commanding-in-Chief of the Indian Navy's Western Naval Command. N.R. Tanjan is advisor at the Tahe Institute. He joins us live from Beijing. And Dan Perry is a senior journalist and a keen China watcher. Welcome, gentlemen, on the show. Admiral Sinha, I want to begin by asking you, what do you make of this protest and the timing just ahead of President Xi Jinping's re-election?
Thank you, Gaurav, for getting me on your program, and namaskar to all our viewers. You know, the point is that, of course, there is a resentment. There are people who are not happy that Xi Jinping is going to have a third tenure. He has had a very massive crackdown on corruption. He has purged very large number of people. So therefore, he also has opposition, resistance, or so-called enemies. But as far as threat to Xi Jinping is concerned, my own reading is that he is very firmly in the chair and he will get elected, or he will get nominated, or whatever it's called, for the third term. And, you know, the positives which have happened under his sort of watch are far too many for the average citizen of China to ignore it. For example, the GDP growth, you know, more than 600 billion people lifted out of poverty, the industrial sort of, you know, mobilization, its stature in the world. Good reason or bad reason, but look at the stature. Americans are sort of, you know, having a really tough time to contain China. Russians have tied up with them, and they're obviously the stature, the international stature of China has gone up. So I think this is possibly an outburst of a lot of opposition people who are not
so
very
you
happy,
think
and therefore
it's an outburst? He remains extremely powerful. Dan Perry, is that also your assessment? What signal does this protest send out? What does it intend to send out?
It's obvious not everyone in China is so pleased with the prospect of a third term for Xi Jinping. It's impossible to say how far it will go and how widely it will spread. A lot of it clearly has to do with the zero COVID policy, which is causing some economic distress. But also, I have to think that the repression in China is so great that the true level of discord probably goes well beyond what we see in the protests. The question is how far the Chinese Communist Party will be willing to go to suppress this discontent if it goes much further.
N.R. Tanjan, you are in Beijing. What is your understanding of this protest? A lone wolf, or is it intended to send out some kind of a bigger message to Xi Jinping? Are at least some people who are opposed to him ganging up on him?
Well, I don't think Xi Jinping is in any danger at this point. I mean, the collective government is absolutely certain about one thing. There can be different feelings about Xi Jinping in this third term, but there is really a very strong feeling that continuity is absolutely important. I mean, the kind of talk points that my colleague has just put out, that, oh, you don't know what's happening, it's a repressive government, that type of thing. These kind of constant negatives are actually bolstering Xi Jinping and the government, because, you know, this is a country where, you know, even last year, 90% of the people approved of the job that the government was doing. It's probably less now with COVID and things like that. There's a lot of frustration. People look overseas and they say, well, why can't we be like them? But the fact is, long COVID is real. 3% of the people who get COVID 1 year afterwards are, you know, not able to fully operate. So you're moving people who were once productive to the unproductive side. They're going to be a drain on society, not something that can help. Those are big, big numbers when you start talking about 3% of the number of people who would get COVID in China. And the government is trying to be very, very careful of that. So you have different narratives. China believes it's doing the right thing. There's always going to be some protests out there. If there wasn't a protest, that would be astounding. So one man, a bullhorn, who lit a fire and put a banner up, does not make a movement.
But Admiral Sinha, isn't Xi Jinping all-powerful in China? Does he not enjoy total control, not just of the party, but also the army and now the People's Armed Police?
You're right, Gaurav. You know, there have been a little bit of murmur that he is all-powerful, the head of the China's military commission, the party general secretary, the president of the country, and now, as you said, of the police force. He has already purged all his opponents from most of these organizations, and he remains the sole leader. I remember that, you know, sometime few years ago, I had traveled to Shanghai, and the Shanghai gang was a little bit concerned that if we give all power to Xi Jinping, then will China turn into something more autocratic, or will there be development? So that was 3-4 years ago, and now that the fact is that he has come this far, I think that, you know, those concerns within the China, except for some small minority, is not there probably. Or maybe they want to see that how does he run with the new team. He will have a new team of a standing committee of Politburo, and possibly in the Politburo of 25 people, he would induct his own people who have probably been doing well in the provinces. So I think that, you know, he may get a chance to, one more chance to see how he does the recovery of economy. In all probability, they will have a new prime minister, and there are two names which are being taken. So I think people will like to, rather than, you know, rocking the sort of apple cart, they would like to see that how does he ride this apple cart in getting China out of this, both the
but will that be riding this apple cart? Will that be riding this apple cart just for another 5 years, or will he remain president for life? Dan Perry, the assessment is Xi Jinping is all-powerful. He's consolidated his hold over the army, the paramilitary force, the party. Is this now a foregone conclusion? He'll be president not just for a third term, perhaps for life?
I mean, clearly the Chinese Communist Party does not allow formal opposition. It's a one-party dictatorship. He's about to get, we believe, a third 5-year term that would make him the longest-serving leader of China since Mao Zedong, longer than Jiang Zemin. He'll pass that threshold in about 3 years, I think. Will it go on and on? Very hard to say. I mean, it's so inscrutable what's going on inside the party. Obviously, they have the 25-member Politburo. There's a standing committee. There's a few people that make these decisions. It's so profoundly absurd in a country of 1.5 billion people. This is how the place is governed, and we don't really know the deals that they have made. They must have concluded that something about Xi's style of rule and his philosophy of governance and notions about China, the nationalism, the very extreme degree of pride in their civilization, which I think the Communist Party is leveraging to achieve some popularity. They must like it, but it's a little sad to observe, because I think the Chinese people are not such an exception to the general desire of human beings to have a degree of freedom. And if anything, under Xi, we see a reversal of what little freedoms had been achieved. I mean, even at the level of dissent inside the Communist Party. I mean, it's now more centralized than it has been for many decades.
In our tangent, Xi Jinping anyway is called chairman of everything in China. He's president, he's party general secretary. Is there any real challenge that he faces from within the Communist Party or from the army of the party?
No, I mean, this is one of the misconceptions about China. This idea that Xi Jinping sits on a throne and waves his hand and writes all these edicts and things like that. He's been trying to push his country in a direction which he believes is right. When you talk about freedom and all of these things, as my colleague has, it's always about a ballot box and the ability to say whatever you want. In Asia, though, freedom is opportunity and also safety. I mean, people do not want to have a situation where they're not free to walk the streets because they might get mugged or shot. They don't want to have politicians who are making their own backroom deals within Congress or the Senate and things. I was a politician in the United States.
No, but isn't he unchallenged? Isn't he unchallenged in in the Communist Party? No one to challenge him within the party, no one to challenge
No,
him
but
in
that's
the army?
what I'm trying to get at. You're talking about it as if he's some sort of dictator. The fact
Isn't
is,
he?
the Chinese work on a consensus system. You can see that in almost all the things that they do, whether it's the RCEP, the AIIB. It's always about consensus. So when they have their weekly meetings of the standing committee, they talk about the issues. It is not a situation where he sits down and says, here's the order of the day, do what I tell you to do.
Okay.
They actually go around the table and they figure out what they want to do, and they have to figure out a
he wants a
consensus
zero
position.
COVID policy, zero tolerance to COVID policy.
Zero COVID policy comes from the scientific end. The
Well, there are
countries
many
that
who
have
remain
ignored
opposed
science
to
have
it.
suffered for it.
Okay, but
Yeah.
Admiral Sinha,
we know that.
okay, Admiral Sinha, what do you make of these videos that have surfaced? Tanks outside banks, protests against the zero COVID policy, economy in some sectors facing headwinds. Is it an exaggeration, or is China facing these major issues of people being unhappy?
You know, Gaurav, when this rumor broke, somebody asked me, and I said that none of these appear to be true. You know, it is quite possible that you know, there is gone into hibernation for some different reason. But to say that the tanks were on the street and possibly it was an old picture which was being flashed, China hasn't come to that stage. He's got full control of the armed forces, and nothing happens without him. The head of the armed forces was present to receive him when he arrived from the SCO conference, and he was with him almost throughout. In fact, it was being made to shown as if he was there to take him under house arrest or something, which was absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
And I think most of us here in India, we had sort of we had already said that, sorry, this doesn't look like any truth.
Oh,
in this.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
The assessment here was fairly correct. And Dan Perry, with Xi Jinping virtually unchallenged, consolidating his hold over party, country, in your appreciation, is that bad news for the democratic world? Let's talk about neighbors first, for Taiwan and India in the times ahead.
Obviously, they're being bellicose about Taiwan. The Ukraine war may factor into this. On the one hand, if China sees Putin getting away with grabbing bits of Ukraine, I mean, again, no one here is telepathic. It would suggest that they might be emboldened. However, of course, Ukraine has become quite a quagmire, and that may give China pause as well. I think crossing the Taiwan Straits to get to the main island of Taiwan will be logistically difficult. They'll be exposed. The terrain is inhospitable, and they'll be facing, I think, as Russia does in Ukraine, very motivated defenders in Taiwan, which, by the way, puts paid, I think, to the notion that there's something about the Chinese people that is antithetical to democracy. Taiwan is mainly populated by the same people, and clearly democracy works there. Clearly they like it and want to preserve it. So no one can predict if China would really invade, but certainly they'll rattle the saber, and clearly that is part of the nationalism component of the Xi style of rule.
I was reporting from Taiwan last month, and you're absolutely right. Democracy in Taiwan is thriving. But before I let you go, Inar Tanjun, if there is nothing to be worried about this lone man's protest in China, why did we see this massive Operation Erase being launched online? That would indicate that the emperor is not too happy about protests. Massive Operation Erase was remove everything about Beijing protest, Sitong Bridge, all these search words were removed.
The reality is that it's not Xi Jinping saying go and do all of these things. What it is people underneath him at the local level are trying to show that they're very loyal to the party, and they run around and try to look important. It's, you know, they are going to take action. They don't want to have a problem there. But don't mistake this as some sort of autocratic, you know, nonsense that's being put forward as
Fair enough.
You know, this kind of anti-China rhetoric.
Fair enough. I will let that be the last word. We would be watching these developments in China very, very closely. But Admiral Sinha, Dan Perry and Inarth Anjan for joining me here on this India Today special. Gentlemen, many thanks. And the big story coming in today, India's nuclear submarine INS Arihant carried out a successful launch of a SLBM, a submarine-launched ballistic missile. This happened on the 14th of October 2022. The missile was tested on a predetermined range and impacted the target area in the Bay of Bengal with very high accuracy, is what the government said. All operational and technological parameters of the weapon system have been tested and validated according to a statement by the government. The successful user training launch of the SLBM by INS Arihant is a very significant step to prove crew competency and to validate the SSBN program, a key element of India's nuclear deterrence capability. This is a robust, survivable and assured retaliatory strike capability in keeping with India's policy to have credible minimum deterrence that underpins our no first use commitment. I quickly want to cut across to India Today's Shiv Arur for more on the story. Shiv, the test itself is extremely significant, and so is the timing of this test, Shiv.
Gaurav, very, very significant test, even though the Ministry of Defence has not revealed which missile, has been tested from the INS Arihant nuclear submarine. From various bits of information that they've put out, one can conjecture that this is likely to have been the 750-kilometer range K-15 Sagarika submarine-launched missile. But the bigger news that we're breaking right now, Gaurav, is that in the next few days, there is a window and there is a notification for firing in the Bay of Bengal, which we expect is going to be the much longer range K-4 submarine-launched ballistic missile that will be tested from the INS Arihant. That is India's true nuclear deterrent, Gaurav. It sports a range of 3,500 to 4,000 kilometers. That's the missile that, can target any site in China. And that's the missile that is really, the primary nuclear deterrent as far as India is concerned, in the sea leg. So all eyes are going to be on the K-4. It has been tested before, but there's been a great deal of secrecy. The interesting thing this time, of course, is that India and the Indian MOD has officially announced that the INS Arihant is testing, this missile, and they probably will release some visuals of it, later, over the weekend. So exciting times. Quite a lot of mystery over why this signal is being sent out right now. Everyone knows what's happening in China at this point of time with President Xi Jinping being handed a third term, etc. But as you and I both know, nuclear messaging, muscle flexing, power play has its own rhythm, it has its own schedule. Of course, it's linked to many of the things happening in the world right now. But kudos to the Nuclear Command, as we call it, the Strategic Forces Command, and this very, very crucial test. There's a bigger one coming up in just the next couple of days.
Shiv, for joining me here on this big story. Many thanks. India has a no first use policy, but India also has a second strike capability. That is all we have for you on this special edition of India First. Many thanks for watching. News and updates continue on India Today. Stay with us.